So it's a real honor to be here. I have many friends who have founded many companies that have gone through this space, so it's wonderful to be here. What I'd love to do is just warn you that we're going to go pretty meta for a while, and then hopefully we'll land on specific problems. And I'm really doing that to prompt you to ask me things that you think might be interesting. If you've never heard of the phrase climate biotech, it's because it's pretty new. It might be, people have been working in that space for a while, but I think Homeworld is one who's really pushing this as a branded idea. That there's so many cool things you can do with biotech. Right now it goes to a specific subset of problems, and how can we start getting the most interesting parts of biotech deployed to planetary scale issues? It is, I don't want to talk about me, but it is just important. When I talk about things, if I seem weird, it's because my background was originally in AI research, and then I went into the design world, made an app with Elmo, obviously, launched a company, Microsoft bought it, and then at age 30, I started my Ph.D. in neuroscience, creating synthetic biology tools for neuroscience. We did in situ sequencing technologies, so we were counting individual RNA molecules, and I did stuff like injecting mouse brains with GFP. So all that led to me thinking, okay, I know how to build a company, I know how to do synthetic biology. Obviously, I'm going to create a startup around climate biotech. And for 3 years, I failed. But what came from it was just getting to know the community. And so today I'm here as talking a part of a larger team, which is the Homeworld Collective team. And the way we say it is we're on the mission to grow the field of climate biotech. It took me 3 years to figure out what I wanted to do in climate. That might be just because I'm slower than most, but we want to be able to accelerate that. So what does it take to get biotech talent in working in good problems? So it started as just this community getting together and conversations, and then now we're funded by excellent philanthropies. I do need to take this moment to I never would have expected to be running a nonprofit. But I think that and that's kind of one of the things I want to impart on you guys today, is just the power of knowing what funding offers are out there to help people work on big problems. So when people ask me what climate biotech is, I think the best way to root things is in carbon capture. I really like it because it's one of the first offensive framing things of what can we do that the planet just needs anyway. There's a very commonly used image here, which people say oh yeah, we know that carbon dioxide removal is, we know we're going to put on more carbon dioxide for a very long time. There's this little curve here saying that by 2030 we need to draw down 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. And I don't think people who haven't shipped things realize how hard that is. And so you can look at where we're at today. So if we need to get to 1 billion tons of drawdown in a decade, we're at under 1 million tons right now. So that means we need to double every year in our capacity if we want to meet these climate goals. And carbon capture in some ways is actually a really nice problem for technologists because it's so well framed, right? It's how much can you draw down carbon dioxide out of the air? What's the energetic cost? What's the cost per ton? Compete, right? And I think that's really nice because a lot of parts of climate get a lot more fuzzy, but I think CDR has raised $1 billion, carbon dioxide removal has raised $1 billion of funding to push into get technologists exactly like us to work on this problem. So I think it's worth thinking about this in terms of, okay, if carbon dioxide removal is in process, what are other areas of planetary health that have been a little less appreciated? So with that kind of as the background, I think it's worth saying that I'm the product of really good mentors, and so I take every opportunity I can to mentor somebody else. And one of my dad mantras I find myself saying a lot is oh, the best feeling in life is having great feelings and the ability to act on them. Just build skills, build ideas. But what's really interesting is that that's a positive feedback loop. And this was a big motivation because actually I think the truth is that the best communities have that same formulation. So the best communities all agree on the great problems, the great ideas, they share them, and then they build tools to act on them. We've seen this before. So I did my PhD first attempt at a PhD, I very much dropped out, with Fei Li, and she created ImageNet. So I think a lot of the exponential growth you've seen in machine learning is due to her work. Everyone knows Jennifer, you're one of the big figures in gene editing. I would say we'd all agree there's been exponential growth in gene editing, both in funding and company creation. And then the really weird one that I just love throwing in because it's just a personal passion is I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is another good example, where it used to be a bunch of dirtbags sleeping on mats, and it still is, but it's now a bunch of dirtbags making a lot of money. And it's the same thing of just there's been a lot of exponential growth. And when you think about the fields that have had this exponential growth, they have these positive feedback loops. And what facilitates those is this is a mental model I really just made up 3 years ago, but it actually seems to be playing out. So when you think about what the fields have done really well, I think they have these 6 fields. And if you step into a field and you think about climate biotech, like what would you do first? And for us, the thing that we focused on is the funding to explore. And the reason I like this exponential mindset is that when I step into climate biotech, after being in machine learning, after being in gene editing, after being in jiu-jitsu, I look at climate biotech, I'm like, this place is a mess, right? There's very hard funding, there's very siloed efforts. It's very unclear what people should work on. Every year I see the same pitch for something that is like stoichiometrically flawed, but it gets money anyway. Like I see these things, and so it's like very important to think about how do you engineer the whole productivity of a field. So the first thing you should be asking, okay, like I'm sick of the meta, like what are some specific areas that we think are interesting? And I can just kind of rattle them off quickly. It's like I think these are the areas that I want to see more focused effort on. So carbon dioxide removal is a pretty straightforward one. Let's get carbon dioxide out of the air, let's get methane out of the air, nitrous out of the air. Biomining I think is very interesting, and that's getting a lot of attention. I think the wild, it gets like more speculative as you go along. But I think like when we really get excited about bio, and if we really let ourselves be like very optimistic, we can see biotech as an infinitely scalable, atomically precise technology that we're just not pushing hard enough. And so if you think about that, there's nothing wrong with imagining having a chemical factory in your hand. And so what we always think about is, okay, like if you were trying to get more activity in that and more coordination, which of these would you focus on? So it comes back to this idea of this virtuous cycle, right? So at this point, we've met with hundreds and hundreds of people in biotech trying to work in climate. And it's the same questions every time. What's the thing to work on? Who the heck would actually fund me if I wanted to do that? And so with this virtuous cycle, this is exactly what we built at Homeworld. So we have a funding platform. So we just gave out $1.3 million across 16 teams. And we specifically try to fund the first experiment. Let's fund something that nobody else would fund. And we've seen this funding gap of NSF, NIH, et cetera. They won't fund you until you have a little bit of evidence. A lot of the bigger funders won't do that. So we want to be that first 50 grand, 100 grand, 150 grand to let people really swing for the fences. And at the same time, we want to take the best ideas and we want to put them public so people know that and we're actually like generating learning and we're not just falling down the same cliff every year. So what we decided as our starting spot was to focus on proteins. And there's a lot of good reasons to focus on proteins. It's a very exciting field for reasons everyone here probably knows well about. But we wanted to make sure that we were doing something that was additive. So we did this huge data mining thing. We read 360,000 papers and grants funded by the government, and we realized that it was less than 1% of that is going to protein engineering efforts for climate. So that was part of our argument that, yeah, this is why we need to put over $1 million into the space. But we didn't want to just do it like the NSF already funds. We didn't want to just do it like VCs fund. So we did this like kind of this funky way where we ask people to pitch their problem publicly, and then we do their solution privately. And it's kind of it might sound like a small little thing, but this captures the best parts about being in a hallway with friends. Right? When I think about myself being at MIT, my favorite part was the hallway. Right? Even if people are working on competing projects, you're still geeking out together, you're still talking at the problem level. And we're really trying to get more people thinking about that. So this is what it looked like. People presented a very public view, and it's a very short pitch about this is why this problem's important. And then if you care about the problem, then we do a full private review on the solution. And so this is what it looked like. It's kind of funny being a funder. Like someone, I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always been on the other side of the table. And so it was very cool to see pitches from all around the world in plastics, fertilizers, carbon capture, methane. And the big picture is like, yes, we funded teams, and I can talk about them. It's, if that's interesting. But I think it's much more interesting to really hover on this idea of trying to create a problem-centric culture. As someone who's done venture-backed companies, I understand that there's a pretty narrow scope in the overall ecosystem of what you can do with venture. Venture is the best thing we have for wealth creation. It's the best thing we have for technology scaling. It's not necessarily the best for going straight into solving a problem. So if you want, you can just go to our website, and we just have been listing problems that we think are really important. And the cool thing about this is that we're friends with the funders who are looking to fund teams on this. And so just like trying to get everything public, we think is a really helpful way just to make the space a little bit more efficient and a little bit more productive. And so what this looks like for us is that when we first launched, this is our old website, we just had 3 problems, and then that turned into 6 projects that got funded for about $500,000. So this is kind of like I said, I'm going to be talking meta for a while. We can definitely go into specifics if that's interesting. But this is us just trying to encourage more ambition. Just like find the hardest problem, steer directly into it. We want to help fund you for your first effort, then get you to the next paycheck. And so I can talk about it, but our whole culture was really different on this. People were very surprised. Like I probably spent 10 hours with every applicant. And we just, we did inline comments, and we told our reviewers to be supportive. So like our reviewers roasted the projects, but in a very supportive way. And I just like, this is really great. So this is like a 20-year veteran of biomanufacturing reviewing an undergrad proposal. And it was just really nice, like really interesting proposal and well described. Good job. In the end, we didn't fund this project, but it was like really good discourse. And then I think she got funded from someone else. So like cycled on the feedback and then did that. And so we gave every single team like a massive bit of feedback. Okay, so the one thing I would say that's worth knowing is the weird world of philanthropy. And so I'm going to show you one curve that I think really illustrates this. So my Ph.D. was in neuroscience. I did that because I was going to commit my life to that, and then I fell in love with synthetic biology, and synthetic biology was my gateway drug to working on climate. Neuroscience is pretty well funded, but a lot of other parts of biotech aren't. When I go visit some of these labs, I see people reusing pipette tips in the not good way, right? But this is just an amazing curve, right? So like federal funding is flat, and then something's happening with private grants that are just making them skyrocket. And then if you do the analysis even more, you see that they're hubbed. So a lot of like the major funders in philanthropy are hubbed around universities or cities. And we look at that and we think like this is something that the internet's really good at, is dispersing. I want this to be much more around problem statements than around cities or universities. And so I'm going to kind of skip over some of this stuff because I think it's just, we're going to wade much too in the meta. But what we really want to do is we want to create an additional curve for how you create a technology. So everyone knows, I'm assuming in this audience, everyone kind of knows like the exponential growth curve of a startup. But I think when you're doing something that's really problem focused first, you don't really know what the right entity that you should be funding as. Are you a nonprofit? Are you this? So what we're trying to do is instead understand that like, what's this activation energy that people can do to de-risk their first big idea? And so, Homeworld is pretty much here too. Like I would say Homeworld is right about here. So like we're living this ourselves. The main thing we just see is like a lot of philanthropies have huge amounts of money committed, and they just have trouble finding projects and practitioners who are credible at like actually taking good swings on goal. So part of this talk is like, if you've got a good idea or you're interested in any of these brief topics, like come talk to me, happy to help. Because I'll finish with this idea, which is that like, there is this crazy idea that there's $1 trillion committed to working on climate mitigation solutions. And if you think about the innovations stack as like starting in early stage science, and very few of them actually become public companies, shout out NEB for being a fantastic leader. If you think about governments, they're really good at creating siloed efforts. And if you think about venture capital, they're really good, but only at a very specific spot in that ecosystem. And so what Homeworld tries to do is we try to be the bottom of the stack. So we do community grants, community knowledge. We're just trying to help people take the non-dilutive funds before they figure out what their right type of entity should be. So I'll leave this with these questions. Is that like, I think it's kind of a salty thing to say, but I actually think we have all the resources we need to achieve sustainability. And I don't think the challenge is convincing people that there's a problem out there. I spend my time across the entire political spectrum. Nobody doubts that we've got problems. People doubt the solutions. And I think it's much better to be like focusing on quality, actionable ideas. And our solution for this is to just empower the community to self-organize, to be better at pitching, to be better at understanding how to connect to funding sources. So that is the very quick run through I wanted to do. I said it's going to be pretty meta, and I wanted to make it more time to just talk about specific problems or things that might be interesting to the audience. So with that, thank you so much. That's the formal part.